Thanks very much, Savitan. Great to be here at Communicate 2013. As Savita says, I'm Douglas White. I work at the Carnegie UK Trust based in Dunfermline, Scotland, but we work across the UK and Ireland as well. And before anyone asks, no, that was not me doing the voiceover on the bears on Ed's last video clip. I can assure you. So yeah, really good first day yesterday. I really enjoyed it. Some great sessions and great speakers and discussions. But one thing that certainly struck me going through the day was there was a real theme about how do we find the right stories that relate to people in their kind of everyday lives, that really kind of connect with people, that not only kind of interest them, but actually inspire and empower them to take action so that they want to go on and build their own stories. And what I kind of wanted to do was to share with you some thoughts from a piece of work that we published last year at Carnegie UK Trust, which looks at kind of local environment issues from a slightly different angle. And I don't think I would in any way kind of purport it to be saying this is the truth, but I would hope that maybe it can contribute to that discussion about how do we seek the truth. And I'll be really interested to hear your thoughts and your comments on the work that we've done. So the main focus of it was looking at very particular local environmental issues around litter and graffiti and vandalism and fly tipping and dog fouling and things like that. And identifying local community projects around the UK where people had come together and worked with their neighbours to actually address these problems in quite innovative ways in their area. And what we found was that not only was doing that kind of work kind of intrinsically valuable and useful, but actually by kind of removing those things and dealing with those problems in their area, people found that it acted as a catalyst for people to engage in a whole range of other things that we hadn't necessarily thought that they might do, and including a whole range of different environmental concerns in their area. It was almost as if dealing with some of these problems acted as a catalyst for them. You know, if I can see it from my kitchen window, it's real. And it kind of struck us that there might be some interesting thoughts and lessons from that. So I wanted just to share with you some points from the work we did, and really interested to hear your thoughts and comments on that. Just before we go into the details of that, just a few quick words on who the Carnegie Trust are and why it is we're interested in this issue. We're, as I say, a charitable foundation based in Dunfermline, Scotland. We were set up 100 years ago by the Scottish-American philanthropist Andrew Carnegie with the wonderful mandate of improving the well-being of the masses of the UK and Ireland. Thankfully, the slightly Victorian element of that remit has since been quietly removed. But this idea about well-being and improving people's well-being is still very much at the heart of everything that we do. And we're no longer a kind of grant-giving foundation in the kind of traditional sense, but much more of a policy and a research and advocacy body. And being interested in well-being, it seems natural to us that the environment is something that we must be interested in. And indeed, the organisation has got a legacy over its 100-year history of being involved in a whole range of different environmental projects and supporting environmental organisations. The piece of work we published last year was called Pride in Place, Tackling Incivilities, and copies of that are in your pack. And as I say, we wanted to focus on these types of environmental issues, which I know are slightly different from the kind of core things that many of you are interested in. So things like litter, dog fouling, and so on. Why is it that we should be interested in these things? Well, actually, what a lot of data tells us is these are things that people tell us are extremely important to them. And their kind of stories and their narratives about their lives, these are the things that are actually a kind of real negative and can be a real blight on their neighbourhoods, particularly, I think, in some of our most deprived communities. So surveys by the likes of Keep Britain Tidy and work by kind of Oxfam on the development of its Humankind Index in Scotland show that when people are asked what kind of is important in terms of your quality of life, having a clean, safe local neighbourhood ranks really highly up there, ahead of often some things you might expect, like access to good local transport and even good schools and things like that. People see it as extremely important. And we know that the issues such as dog fouling are often kind of top of the mailbag for letters about dog fouling, not dog fouling per se, are top of the mailbag for our elected representatives at both local and national level. So these things matter to people. But I don't think the policy discourse in terms of the priorities attached to these problems, and maybe in terms of strategy or often in terms of funding, necessarily always relates to how important that people tell them these things are to them. So we wanted to do a piece of work on it for that reason. We also, very aware of the public service reform agenda in the UK at the moment, an increasing drive to encourage communities to do more themselves and to not be reliant upon the state for the provision of a whole range of different services. And it struck us that actually this is one area where this is very local, it's very street level. Actually, this idea about communities taking ownership and taking leadership could actually be quite effective, and there's quite a bit of resonance there. So we wanted to do a project finding some of the best community projects from around the UK where the local neighbourhood had taken control of these issues and had done something innovative and effective to address them. Because the question is, how do you bring that kind of thing to scale? So we wanted to find some best practice projects that we could share with others. So we put together an expert reference group, as you do, with a whole range of different organisations involved that helped us steer us through this process, and contracted researchers and so on. And we identified 8 case studies from around the UK. So we have the Urban Eye project, which was based in West London, Queen Glasgow, which is the city of Glasgow as a whole, Redruth Brearley Leeds project down in Cornwall, Tipton Litter Watch in the West Midlands, Civic Pride, which is based in Rossendale in Lancashire, Llewyn Hendy Growing Spaces project near Llanelli in Wales. I had to do a presentation on this project once in Wales, and I was fairly careful about my pronunciation. I'm sure I got it terribly wrong. Then we have Bredhurst Woodland Action Group in Kent, which Vanessa's going to be kind enough to tell us a lot more about in a couple of moments, and Spring Hill Garden Reflection in Belfast, Northern Ireland. And each of these projects find different ways of tackling some of the environmental problems that I described in their neighbourhood. And I'm just going to share briefly with you a couple of the things that they did. This one, first of all, is the Llewyn Hendy project in Wales, where there was a piece of wasteland in the community, a piece of derelict land that became known locally simply as the tip. For many years, people just dumped rubbish and so on it, and it was obviously, as you can see, very unpleasant. Local community group eventually kind of said, we want to do something about this, and with the help of a government agency, Community First, put together a project, and they transformed it into a set of community allotments, which is a fantastic project. The next one, I can't actually see it too well actually, but it's extremely dark. This is in West London, and there's a kind of motorway flyover here. You can see cutting right through the heart of the community, which is very dirty, oppressive, unpleasant, quite unsafe. And there were some public health issues around this site as well, with netting at the side of the flyovers attracting kind of bird droppings and so on. Again, a local group, it was a local artistic group, said, we really want to do something about this. This is a really negative kind of blight upon our community. And after many negotiations with the highway agency and transport companies, they got permission to do some work on the flyover, and they turned it into that, which was a fantastic change for that community. This is Bredhurst in Kent, which I won't say too much about, but suffice to say that there's a woodlands on the edge of the town, edge of the village, which had been rife with kind of fly tipping, which really stopped local residents actually enjoying the woodlands for what they should be. So Vanessa and fellow community members put together a great project and have cleaned up those woodlands, and actually they're now a fantastic place for people to use, but much more about that shortly. This is the project in Redruth in Kent. And here you can see there's a kind of pathway that's cleaned up now, a pathway that should have been a great way of connecting one side of town to the other, but no one used it. Everyone walked along the main road instead because the whole thing was covered in litter and rubbish and felt unpleasant and unsafe. Again, different elements of the community came together. The local school was involved because it was based quite near the pathway. The local Tesco was involved. Important for us to always remember that businesses are part of the community too, I think. And a local training company called Ecologic, who provides training opportunities for people who are looking for work, and particularly focused on recycling opportunities. And they essentially work together and take turns in many ways in cleaning up the pathway, so that now, lo and behold, it actually is something that people use, and it's an important asset to the community. This is in Glasgow, where there's a slightly different approach. Here, the city council said, actually, we've got a real problem with litter and kind of fly tipping and dog fouling in our city, and we want to do something about it, but we want to engage the community. So they set up a programme that invited volunteers to come forward from each neighbourhood, each district in the city, to take the lead in running and organising regular cleanups in their particular neighbourhood. And they've now set up across the whole of the city, and the council provides training and equipment and so on. But there are these local neighbourhood volunteers, neighbourhood improvement volunteers, you see one of them here, who actually take the lead in organising their fellow community members to do stuff. This is in Rossendale, this is in Lancashire. Again, quite a simple project in terms of just regular litter cleanups and planting of kind of gardens in the town centre. But the onus on this actually came from a slightly different perspective. Here it was a very small local business, but they said actually this is having a negative effect on our business, and therefore we want to do something about this, all the litter that's in this town. So they actually went out and engaged with community groups and organised things and got things going and were the kind of spark behind making it happen. So although the project itself is quite similar to some of the other ones, it's quite interesting to think about the different ways in that community engagement can happen and that those kind of stories can develop. This is Tipton Litter Watch in the West Midlands, and they've had a fantastic story over the last kind of over 15 years actually. They began initially just as a campaigning charity, campaigning kind of community group saying, litter's a problem in our town, rubbish is a problem in our town, vandalism is a problem. We want the council to do more about this. And actually they've developed over many years into, actually they're now a doing project, and they've actually set up a whole sort of set of activities and so on for kids that they've had embedded in the curriculum in every borough, in every school in the borough. So they've actually kind of had a great story where they've transformed from asking others to do something to doing something themselves. So I think from that work, I mean, I've just skated through kind of what those projects have done quite briefly. I mean, obviously there's a lot more detail behind each of those. But I think there's some key things that we can see, some key positive impacts that would emerge from those. Fairly obviously, things like less graffiti and less litter and so on, and that's obviously intrinsically good. The projects have also reclaimed public space. They've turned something that had been a negative, a kind of a blight, a difficulty for their neighbourhood, and turned it into a positive thing, like the derelict land transforming into an allotment, for example. Obviously, some of those improvements have helped the places to feel safer, and have led to sort of health improvements amongst community members as well, because they're now places that people can go out and do things. But I think what's really important for kind of our discussion here, hopefully it's helpful for our discussion here, is actually developing, in doing these projects, the people that have been involved have developed new skills, which obviously helps those projects themselves, but actually then gears up people to be involved in a whole range of other things that they might want to do in the future. So bidding for funding, financial management, community engagement, how do you kind of organise some of these activities? Those are skills that have been developed through these projects. Similarly, by the community coming together to address a problem, they've actually strengthened their own ties and their own links. And I think in some of the presentations yesterday, we were speaking about the importance of community action versus individual action. And actually that came through really strongly in these case studies, that where people worked together, it had a really cohesive effect on the local community, which not only helped that thing that they were trying to tackle, but actually meant they were actually in a much better place to do more in future. And crucially, what it was that people wanted to do more of, in many cases, once they'd done these initial projects, was more stuff to improve their local environment. It came through very strongly in the case studies, and this backs up a lot of the academic literature on the topic, is that things like litter and dogfiling and graffiti and some of these other problems almost seem to act as a kind of a weight, a kind of burden, a blight on an area that had a kind of an impact on people's attitude to what they wanted to do in the place that they lived. And because you can look out your window and you can see rubbish or whatever it might be, it kind of puts people off doing more or tackling some of the bigger challenges that we've been exploring over the last day or so. But if people can come together and tackle some of these problems, it's almost as if there's a removal of that challenge. And actually coming together can be a real catalyst and a gateway to do a whole lot of other things. And given what people have been coming together to do is tackle an environmental problem, albeit at a low level, around litter or whatever, it seems fairly natural that the next step in their story, the next journey for them, would be to do more to help improve their local environment. And that came through great examples in all the projects that we looked at. So in Bredhurst, and Vanessa will tell us how the initial spur for them was just simply to remove the woods from fly tipping, tackle fly tipping in the woods so people could go out and do things. But actually they now moved on to do a whole set of kind of conservation and woodland management. In Glasgow, the initial catalyst, the reason people wanted to do things was because they wanted to have more clean streets. But if they're going to clean up litter, it's fairly obvious that quickly that program becomes not just a cleaning up litter program, but a recycling program. What can we do with the litter that we've got? But that wasn't the thing that got them going in the first place. It wasn't the thing that said, we must have a recycling program. It was, let's have cleaner streets. And that's how then the story developed. In Redruth, the pathway through the town, they cleaned up the pathway. Well, what next? Actually, there's a really nice waterway running next to that pathway. There's a lot of trees along the pathway. Well, let's have some signs up about the nature that kind of exists here. Let's tell people about that. Let's get people engaged. And let's think about how we can protect some of that nature better than we have done previously. And that's what they've started to do. Similarly, in Rossendale in Lancashire, again, cleaning up rubbish in the town, doing some planting of gardens and hanging baskets. And now they've got a tree growing program as well. So small but simple steps, but there's a progression there. And you can see that also in the Litter Watch project in Tipton as well, where they've gone from campaigning about litter to they actually now have an eco-bus that they take around every school in the area, and it's got a whole set of fantastic activities where kids can go on and learn about climate change and biodiversity and so on. When that project began in 1997, those people had no interest or thoughts about that issue whatsoever, but about some of those challenges. But they were interested in making their town cleaner. But it acted as a gateway and a catalyst for them to take action. And I think that's how we can, there seems to me there's perhaps potential here for thinking about how some of these things might act as in helping people to move from the spectrum that Simon I think so well described yesterday, of moving people from a 1 to a 4 or a 5 in terms of where they are on some of these issues. But I think I just wanted to finish on this closing point is that none of these projects did any of them stuff by themselves. I've got up here a whole set of success factors which contributed to why each of these case studies worked. But I wanted just to dwell on this point about external partners, because all of the projects had support from other organisations, be it the local council, be it funders, be it charities, and so on. And it seemed to me that if environmental organisations are able to engage with communities on some of these very, very low-level issues, then perhaps there are some partnerships that could be developed here that can actually begin to help people to move on and to develop what they're working on for the benefit of their environment in the longer term. And I think it'd be really useful and really interesting to hear some of your thoughts about whether that is a likely hypothesis. I know there'll be challenges and difficulties with that involved, but I'd be really interested to have a discussion about that. So on that point, I will finish up and hand over to Vanessa to hear more about Breadhurst. So thank you very much and look forward to hearing your thoughts.